There's a puppeteer in your life right now. You can't see the strings. You can't feel them. But every single day, those invisible threads are yanking at your mood, your decisions, your confidence. And the worst part? You're the one who tied them there. Maybe it's your manager's offhand comment that ruins your entire afternoon. Maybe it's a text message that never comes. And suddenly, your whole evening is spent staring at your phone, waiting. Maybe it's the look on someone's face at a dinner table that makes you second-guess everything you said for the next 3 days. Here's what nobody tells you. This is not normal, and it is absolutely not permanent. By the time you finish reading this, you're going to understand something that most people spend their entire lives never figuring out. You're going to learn how to cut those strings, not by becoming cold, not by shutting people out, but by becoming so grounded in yourself that nothing outside of you can shake what's inside of you. This is about taking back your power. Let's begin. Chapter 1. The uncomfortable truth about emotional attachment. Let's start with something that might sting a little. That thing you call love, that thing you call loyalty, that thing you call just caring deeply. A lot of the time, it's not any of those things. It's fear wearing a very convincing costume. When you are emotionally attached to a person or an outcome, you're not coming from a place of strength. You're operating from a place of quiet desperation. You need them to respond a certain way so you can feel okay. You need their nod of approval before you trust your own instincts. You need their happiness to unlock your own. That's not connection. That's dependency. And dependency is one of the most exhausting ways a human being can live. Take an honest inventory of your day. How much of your emotional experience is actually yours? And how much of it is borrowed from other people's moods, reactions, and opinions? When your colleague seems cold in a meeting, do you spend the next hour wondering what you did wrong? When you post something online and the response is quieter than expected, does something in your chest deflate? When someone you respect disagrees with you, do you immediately start doubting yourself? If you're being truly honest, and this is a safe space to be honest, the answer is probably more than you'd like to admit. Here's the thing most people never stop to examine. Emotional attachment doesn't make you more loving. It makes you more controllable. When someone knows that a certain tone of voice will make you shut down, they have leverage over you, even if they're not using it consciously. When your emotional weather is determined by someone else's forecast, they are, in effect, running your internal climate. And when you need someone's validation to feel worthy, you've handed them a power they never asked for and probably don't even know they're holding. The most grounded, effective, genuinely happy people you'll ever encounter have something in common. They've stopped outsourcing their emotional state. They don't need a standing ovation to feel confident in their work. They don't need universal agreement to stand by their choices. They don't need the room to love them before they walk into it. This is what emotional detachment actually looks like. Not a wall, not a fortress, not a cold shoulder. It's a root system. Deep, internal, unshakable. And here's where the confusion usually lives. People hear emotional detachment and picture someone who doesn't care, who's difficult to reach, who moves through life like they're wearing emotional armor made of ice. But that picture is completely wrong. True detachment is what makes genuine connection possible. When you're not desperate for someone's approval, you can be fully real with them. When you don't need them to behave a certain way for you to feel safe, you can love them freely without the invisible strings of expectation tangled between you. When you're not white-knuckling a specific outcome, you can actually be present. You can actually enjoy what's happening instead of managing it. That's not coldness. That's freedom. Now, none of this developed in a vacuum. Your emotional attachment patterns have a history. Most of them were written before you were old enough to write your own story. If you grew up in an environment where approval felt conditional, where love seemed to expand and contract based on your performance, your compliance, your ability to keep the peace, you learned something that felt like survival. Make them happy, and you'll be okay. Watch their face. Adjust accordingly. Don't rock the boat. That strategy may have served you once, but you are not a child anymore, and that strategy is now costing you more than it ever protected you. The beautiful and difficult truth is this: you have the capacity to rewrite those patterns, not quickly, not painlessly, but completely. You can learn to be the source of your own approval. You can develop an internal foundation that doesn't crack every time someone outside of you shifts. You can stop living in reaction mode and start living from a place of genuine, rooted choice. That is what this entire journey is about. And it starts with recognizing something most people never let themselves fully see. Chapter 2. The Invisible Architecture of Lost Power. Picture this now and be honest about whether any of it sounds familiar. You wake up in the morning and before you've even fully opened your eyes, your hand is reaching for your phone. Not because you need anything, but because some part of you is already scanning. Is there anything there? Did anyone reach out? Did anything happen that I need to know about? And whatever you find in those first few minutes sets the emotional temperature for your entire morning. A warm message and you feel light. Silence. Or worse, something ambiguous, and something tightens in your chest before you've even had coffee. You get to work, and your supervisor gives you a piece of feedback that could mean a dozen different things. Instead of asking a clarifying question and moving on, you spend the next 90 minutes running it through every possible interpretation. You replay the exact words. You study the tone. You wonder if there's subtext. Your output for the morning takes a hit because your mental bandwidth is occupied by a conversation that was probably nothing. Later, a friend seems a little quieter than usual over lunch, and suddenly you're cataloging every interaction you've had with them over the past 2 weeks. Did you say something that landed wrong? Were you too much? Not enough? You draft a text asking if everything's okay, then delete it, then draft it again, because you can't decide if sending it is caring or needy. By the time the evening comes, you're not tired because your day was physically demanding. You're tired because you spent it emotionally managing other people's realities, reading signals, adjusting your behavior, seeking reassurance, absorbing moods that were never yours to carry. This is the invisible architecture of lost power, and most people live inside it so long they forget there's anything else. Your power wasn't taken from you in one dramatic moment. It was quietly borrowed over years in small increments by a conditioning process that taught you to measure your worth through other people's reactions. It started early. Maybe love in your household had asterisks. Maybe you learned through trial and error that certain versions of you got warmth and certain versions got silence. So you became a careful observer. You developed a sensitivity to the emotional atmosphere around you, a sort of early warning system for when things were about to shift. And you got very, very good at adjusting yourself to keep the temperature comfortable. That's not weakness. That was intelligence in a specific environment. The problem is, you carried the system with you long after you left that environment. And now, it shows up everywhere. In your relationships, you find yourself choosing your words like you're diffusing something. You stay in dynamics long past their expiration date because the discomfort of leaving feels worse than the discomfort of staying. You overlook things you shouldn't overlook because the alternative, being alone, being the one who walked away, being the one who caused the ending, feels intolerable. At work, you volunteer for things you don't have capacity for because saying no feels like a risk you're not willing to take. You let other people's urgency become your emergency. You stay quiet in rooms where your voice would actually add something. Because what if it doesn't land the way you hope? In social settings, you're a different flavor of yourself depending on who's in the room. You have a version for your family, a version for your colleagues, a version for the people you most want to impress. And somewhere underneath all those versions, there's a you that rarely gets airtime, the one that exists regardless of audience. On your phone, you've built a small economy of validation. Posts are investments, likes are returns, and a bad return on a vulnerable post can genuinely affect your mood in a way that would embarrass you if you said it out loud. Here's the most unsettling piece of this entire picture. The people whose approval you're working so hard to earn are mostly too busy chasing their own approval to notice your effort. You're not performing for an engaged audience. You're performing for people who are performing too. Everyone in the room is waiting for applause. No one's giving it because they're all holding their breath for theirs. This is why emotional attachment is so quietly destructive. It doesn't just make you exhausted. It keeps you in a kind of perpetual emotional childhood, always waiting for someone outside of you to tell you it's safe to feel good about yourself. The shift out of this, the real lasting shift, doesn't happen through more effort in the same direction. It doesn't happen by getting better at earning approval. It happens by becoming someone who no longer needs it in the same way. And that starts with understanding exactly how your mind has been running this program without your conscious permission. Chapter 3, Why Your Brain is Working Against You and How to Outsmart It. Here's something that will immediately reframe every overreaction you've ever had. Your brain is not broken. It's just running ancient software on a modern operating system. Deep inside your brain sits a small almond-shaped structure called the amygdala. Its entire job, the only job it has ever had, is to scan your environment for threats and sound the alarm before your conscious mind has time to think. It's fast, it's automatic, and it does not distinguish between a lion on the savannah and a LinkedIn comment that rubbed you the wrong way. When your amygdala detects what it interprets as social danger, a disapproving look, an unanswered message, a critical remark from someone whose opinion matters to you, it responds with the same biochemical urgency it would use if you were in physical danger. Cortisol floods your system. Your heart rate ticks up. Your thinking narrows. Your body is quiet, literally preparing you to fight or flee from a threat that doesn't exist. This is not a character flaw. This is evolution running a program that was incredibly useful when being cast out of your social group meant death. The need to belong, to be accepted, to stay in the good graces of the people around you, That was survival, not vanity. Your ancestors, who were exquisitely sensitive to social rejection, lived longer because of it. But you are not on the savannah, and the critical email from your manager is not a predator. Understanding this gives you something most people never have: perspective on your own reactions in real time. When you feel that familiar spike of anxiety because someone seems distant, or that defensive heat rising because someone questioned your judgment, that's not truth. That's your amygdala doing its job, which happens to be slightly outdated for the world you're actually living in. The feeling is real, the threat most of the time is not. And the moment you can create even a sliver of space between the trigger and your response, the moment you can pause and say, wait, is this actual danger, or is this my brain pattern matching to something old? Everything changes. That space is called metacognition. Thinking about your thinking, observing your mind rather than being completely fused with it. And it is, without exaggeration, one of the most powerful capacities a human being can develop. Without metacognition, you are a pinball. Stimulus hits you, and you go wherever the bumpers send you. Reactive, automatic, predictable. With metacognition, you become the person holding the machine. You still feel the impact, but you choose the direction. Here's a distinction that sounds small, but will quietly restructure how you relate to your inner world. There is a profound difference between being an emotion and having an emotion. When you say, I am anxious, you've merged with the feeling, you've become it. There's no separation, no observer, no exit. But when you say, I'm noticing anxiety right now, interesting, I wonder what's underneath that, you've stepped into a different relationship with the same experience. You're still feeling it, but you're no longer defined by it. This isn't just semantic gymnastics. It's a fundamental shift in identity. The person who is their emotions is constantly at their mercy. The person who observes their emotions has freedom, even when those emotions are intense, uncomfortable, or inconvenient. Now let's talk about the stories. Most emotional suffering doesn't come from what actually happens to you. It comes from the narrative your mind constructs around what happens, and then treats as fact. Your colleague doesn't reply to your message for 3 hours. That's the event. That's all that happened. But your mind doesn't stop there. It starts writing. Maybe they're upset with me. Maybe I said something wrong yesterday. Maybe they're talking to someone else about it right now. And suddenly, you're emotionally responding not to the 3-hour silence, but to an entire drama your mind invented in the absence of information. Here's the uncomfortable reality. Your mind, when left to fill in blanks, tends to fill them with worst-case scenarios. Not because you're pessimistic, because your amygdala defaults to threat. It would rather prepare you for a danger that doesn't exist than leave you unprepared for one that does. Emotional detachment means learning to hold your own stories loosely. To notice when you've moved from what happened to what I've decided it means, and to pause there, to ask, do I actually know this? Or am I filling a silence with my fears? Most of the time, you don't know. And I don't know yet is a far more honest and far less painful place to stand than the catastrophic narrative your mind defaulted to. One more concept that will anchor everything that follows: impermanence. Everything moves. Everything shifts. The emotions that feel permanent at 2 a.m. are gone by noon. The relationship that seems like it defines you will eventually transform. The success you're chasing will arrive, stay for a while, and change shape. The failure that feels like a verdict is actually just a chapter. When you truly absorb this, not as a philosophical idea but as a lived understanding, you stop gripping so tightly. You stop needing the good things to be permanent and stop being destroyed when difficult things arrive. Because you know in your bones that neither is the final word. This is where emotional stability comes from, not from controlling your circumstances, from understanding their nature. Chapter 4. The 6 mindset shifts that change everything. Understanding the psychology is step 1, but understanding without application is just interesting reading. What actually transforms your life are the shifts in how you fundamentally see yourself and your relationship to the world around you. These aren't hacks or techniques. They're identity-level changes, and they compound over time in ways that will quietly astonish you. Shift 1. From seeking their approval to trusting your own. Right now, there's a very good chance that someone else holds the remote control to your self-worth. A parent, a partner, a boss, a feed full of strangers. You wait for their signal before deciding how to feel about yourself. Their praise lifts you. Their criticism lands like a verdict. What would it feel like to take that remote back? Not to become arrogant or closed off to feedback, but to become the primary authority on your own value, to know at a level that isn't up for negotiation that your worth doesn't expand or contract based on anyone else's opinion. Here's the truth that makes this possible. Other people's opinions of you are information about them, their preferences, their conditioning, their current emotional state, their own unresolved stuff. When someone criticizes you, they are telling you something true about themselves. They may or may not also be telling you something useful about you, and you can evaluate that separately. But their opinion is not a verdict. It never was. Shift 2. From needing to be liked to being willing to be honest. The need to be universally liked is one of the most quietly destructive forces in a person's life. It turns you into a shapeshifter, always adjusting, always softening, always editing yourself to match the room. And the tragic irony is that the more you contort yourself to be liked, the less anyone actually knows you. You can't be genuinely loved by people who only know your performance. The people who command real respect, the kind that isn't based on pleasing or posturing, are the ones who are willing to be themselves even when it costs them something. They have opinions. They have limits. They say what they mean. And some people don't like it, and they're okay with that. Being willing to be disliked by some people is the price of being genuinely known by others. It's a trade worth making. Shift 3. From taking things personally to understanding that other people's behavior is mostly about them. When someone is dismissive, it's usually because they're overwhelmed. When someone is critical, it's usually because they're insecure. When someone withdraws, it's usually because they're processing something that has nothing to do with you. The world is full of people acting out their inner weather on whoever is standing nearest. You don't have to be their weather report. The moment you genuinely internalize this, not just know it intellectually, but feel it, you stop spending enormous energy trying to diagnose what you did wrong every time someone around you shifts. Most of the time, it's not about you. And even when it is, their reaction is still theirs to manage. Shift 4. From attachment to outcomes to investment in the process. You cannot control results. You can influence them, set yourself up for them, work hard toward them. but the final outcome always has variables you don't hold. When you attach your emotional well-being to outcomes you can't fully control, you are building your house on land that isn't yours. Attach instead to what is fully in your hands. The quality of your effort, the integrity of your approach, the consistency of your values, the courage you brought to the attempt. These are yours. No result can take them from you. This shift doesn't make you less ambitious. It makes you more resilient. And paradoxically, people who aren't emotionally hostage to specific outcomes tend to achieve more because they're not paralyzed by the fear of getting it wrong. Shift 5. From scarcity to abundance. A lot of your attachment patterns are rooted in a quiet, unexamined belief that there isn't enough. Not enough love, not enough opportunity, not enough room for you. This scarcity thinking makes you grip relationships, validation, status, security, in a way that often pushes away the very things you're trying to hold. What changes when you genuinely believe there is enough? That if this particular door closes, there are others? That if this person doesn't see your value, someone else will? That if this opportunity passes, you have the capacity to create or find another? Abundance thinking doesn't mean being naive about reality. It means trusting your own capacity to navigate it. And that trust, not in circumstances but in yourself, is the foundation that makes everything else possible. Shift 6. From reactive to intentional. Most people are living in permanent response mode. Something happens, they react. Something else happens, they react again. Days, weeks, years pass, and life is essentially a sequence of responses to external events rather than an expression of internal intention. What would it look like to decide each morning what kind of person you're going to be today, and then move through the world from that decision rather than from whatever the world throws at you? This is the shift from reactive to intentional, from passenger to driver. It doesn't mean you control everything. It means you show up with a chosen orientation rather than an automatic one. Chapter 5. Breaking the chains you didn't know were there. You understand the psychology. You've seen the mindset shifts. Now comes the part that actually requires something from you. Because breaking emotional patterns is not comfortable. It is not a weekend exercise. It is a consistent, sometimes uncomfortable, always worthwhile practice of doing the opposite of what feels automatic, until the new way starts to feel natural. Here's where it gets real. The first practice, the pause. Between every trigger and every response, there is a gap. Right now, that gap might be approximately 0 milliseconds. Someone says something that lands wrong, and you're already in your reaction before you know what happened. Your entire job, starting today, is to widen that gap. When something activates you, and something will probably today, before you respond, breathe. Not metaphorically. Literally take one slow breath. In the time it takes to do that, your prefrontal cortex starts coming back online. You get a fraction of a second to be a person who chooses rather than a system that fires. That fraction of a second is everything. The second practice, curiosity over judgment. When a strong emotion arises, your instinct is probably to either act on it immediately or try to suppress it as fast as possible. Both of those keep you stuck in the same loop. Instead, try something different. Get curious. What is this feeling actually about? Not the surface story and not I'm upset because they didn't text back, but underneath. What need is this touching? What old or fear does this remind your nervous system of? What would a wise, grounded version of you make of this moment? You're not trying to eliminate the feeling, you're trying to understand it. And the moment you bring curiosity to an emotion, you've already shifted your relationship to it. You're no longer inside it, you're looking at it. The third practice, non-reaction as a skill. This one is subtle, but transformative. There are people in your life, and you know exactly who they are, who have learned, consciously or not, which buttons to press to get a rise out of you, a certain tone, a particular subject, a specific kind of dismissal. And every time they press that button and get the expected reaction, the pattern reinforces itself. Non-reaction means refusing to be predictable in that way. It's not about pretending nothing happened. It's about choosing not to give the moment the emotional energy it's reaching for. Staying even, staying grounded, responding from your chosen identity rather than from the trigger. Start small. The next time someone is short with you in a way that normally would spiral into rumination, let it pass. Don't pick it up and carry it. Notice how it feels to just not engage with it. That feeling of lightness, of staying clean, that's power. The fourth practice, emotional boundaries. A boundary is not a wall. It's not a punishment. It's not a dramatic declaration. A boundary is simply a clear understanding of what you will and won't participate in, communicated calmly, held consistently. If someone speaks to you with contempt, a boundary isn't getting angry. It's saying, quietly and without drama, I'm not available for this conversation when it sounds like this, and meaning it. If someone consistently uses your openness against you, a boundary is becoming more selective about what you share with them, not as revenge, simply as self-respect. If you've been saying yes to things that cost you peace, a boundary is beginning to say no, without a lengthy justification, without an apology, without guilt. That doesn't work for me is a complete sentence. The fifth practice, meeting your own emotional needs. This is perhaps the most quietly revolutionary shift of all. Right now, you probably have a list of emotional needs. The need to feel valued, the need to feel seen, the need to feel encouraged, that you are waiting for other people to meet, and you're frustrated at a low hum because they keep not meeting them quite right. What if you learn to meet those needs yourself first, not because you don't deserve to receive love and support from others? You do. But when you are the primary source of your own validation, your own encouragement, your own sense of being enough, you stop walking through the world with that quiet desperation. You stop needing people to fill something. You can receive their love as a gift rather than a lifeline. That shift changes every relationship you're in. You become someone who chooses connection rather than someone who needs it to survive. And that difference between choosing and needing is the difference between healthy love and dependency. Chapter 6, Building Your Emotional Armor. Let's clear something up right away. Emotional armor is not a shell. It's not the kind of protection that keeps people at a distance or numbs you to the texture of life. The person who builds walls and calls it strength isn't protected. They're just isolated. And isolation is its own kind of prison. Real emotional armor is something entirely different. It's the internal infrastructure that allows you to step fully into life, into relationships, into risk, into vulnerability, without losing yourself in the process. It's what lets you care deeply without being destroyed when things don't go the way you hoped. It's the difference between being moved by something and being swept away by it. Think of it less like a wall and more like a root system. The tree with deep roots doesn't avoid the storm. It moves in the wind, bends, responds, and stays standing. The tree without roots gets torn up by weather that a rooted tree barely notices. You're building roots. Here's how. The first component, unshakable self-worth. Most people's sense of worth is a variable, not a constant. It goes up when things go well, when the project succeeds, when someone attractive pays attention, when the feedback is glowing, and it contracts when things go sideways, when you're criticized, overlooked, or rejected. This fluctuation is exhausting, and it makes you permanently vulnerable to whoever happens to be in the room with an opinion. Unshakable self-worth means moving your sense of value out of the variable column and into the constant column. Not because you're perfect, not because you've earned it through a sufficient number of achievements, but because worth isn't something that gets earned in the first place. You exist. That's the starting point. Everything else, your skills, your growth, your relationships, your contributions, those are expressions of a worth that was already there. They add texture and meaning to your life. They don't create or destroy your fundamental value. When you truly internalize this, criticism changes character. It becomes information you can evaluate, useful or not, rather than a referendum on whether you deserve to take up space. Rejection stops feeling like a verdict and starts feeling like incompatibility. Failure stops being evidence of inadequacy and starts being feedback you can work with. This isn't a mantra you repeat until you believe it. It's a recognition you return to again and again until it becomes the ground you stand on. The second component, emotional independence. There's a version of you that has been waiting, sometimes patiently, sometimes desperately, for other people to provide what you actually have the capacity to provide for yourself. Waiting for your partner to reassure you that you're enough. Waiting for your manager to acknowledge that your work matters. Waiting for your friends to notice that you're struggling, and when that reassurance doesn't come, or doesn't come in the right form, at the right time, in the right words, you're left feeling unseen, unimportant, alone. Emotional independence doesn't mean you stop receiving love and support from others. It means you stop being dependent on those things to function. You become your own first responder. When you need encouragement, you generate it internally before you look outward. When you need comfort, you learn to offer it to yourself before reaching for someone else to fix your state. The people in your life can then give you things freely, and you can receive them freely, because you're not standing there holding an empty cup that desperately needs to be filled. You're offering your cup and receiving into fullness. That's a completely different dynamic, and the people who love you will feel the difference. The third component, mental discipline. Your mind, left unsupervised, is not always your ally. It catastrophizes, it replays, it compares. It invents threats in the absence of information. It can take a perfectly ordinary Tuesday and turn it into an evidence-gathering exercise for everything that's wrong with your life. Mental discipline is not about forcing positivity or suppressing difficult thoughts. It's about developing the capacity to notice what your mind is doing and consciously choose whether to follow it there. When you catch yourself spiraling into a worst-case narrative, you don't need to fight the thought. You can simply observe it. Interesting. My mind is going here. Is this useful? Is this based on what's actually happening? Or is this a story? And then gently but firmly redirect. This is a muscle. The more you practice it, the stronger it gets. And over time, you'll notice that your mind starts to default toward more useful terrain, not because you forced it there, but because you stopped automatically feeding the patterns that kept pulling it into chaos. The fourth component, composure under pressure. Here's a reliable truth. Anyone can stay calm when nothing is at stake. The real test, the test that reveals what your emotional armor is actually made of, comes when everything is at stake, when the conversation gets heated, when the feedback is brutal, when the situation feels genuinely threatening. This is when most people's composure evaporates. They raise their voice or go completely silent. They say things they'll need to apologize for, or they shut down in ways that create distance. The heat of the moment defeats the intention of the person. Staying composed under pressure is a skill built through graduated exposure. You start small. The driver who cuts you off, practice not making it mean anything. The passive-aggressive comment at a family dinner, practice observing it without picking it up. The disappointing result on something you worked hard on, practice sitting with the feeling without letting it collapse your whole sense of direction. Each small practice builds the capacity for the larger ones, and eventually you become the person in the room who stays level when everyone else is escalating. That person has enormous influence, not because they're loudest, but because they're clearest. The fifth component, selective vulnerability. Being emotionally strong does not mean being emotionally sealed. The human need for genuine connection is real, and pretending you don't have it doesn't make you powerful. It makes you lonely and dishonest. The goal is not to close yourself off. It's to be thoughtful about who gets access to your inner world. Not everyone has earned that access. Not everyone will handle what you share with care, and that's not cynicism. It's discernment. Your deepest fears, your most fragile hopes, your unfinished grief, those belong in the company of people who have demonstrated over time that they can hold what you share with integrity and warmth. Everyone else gets the version of you that's appropriate for the level of trust that actually exists between you. This isn't performance, it's wisdom, and it protects your vulnerability without eliminating it. The sixth component, a strong internal foundation. What sustains you when external circumstances shift? If your answer is primarily other people or my job or how things are going right now, that's worth examining, because all of those things will, at various points, change. People leave or disappoint you. Jobs end. Circumstances fluctuate. And if your foundation is built entirely on external structures, every time those structures move, you move with them. A strong internal foundation means having sources of meaning, purpose, and identity that belong to you, independent of whether anyone else validates them, participates in them, or even knows about them. It means having things you're genuinely curious about, that you pursue because they matter to you. Goals you're working toward because they're aligned with your values, not because they'll impress someone. A sense of who you are that exists before anyone else enters the room. When you have that, when your identity has a core that doesn't depend on external confirmation, you become genuinely hard to destabilize, not because nothing can touch you, but because what's most essential about you is not up for grabs. Chapter 7. The Power of Choosing What to Care About. There is a quiet superpower that almost no one talks about, and it might be the single most practical concept in this entire conversation. You do not have to care about everything. Read that again, because it contradicts something most people were implicitly taught, that caring more about more things more intensely is a virtue. That emotional investment is proportional to character. That if you're not upset about something, you must not really value it. This is wrong, and it is costing you enormous amounts of energy every single day. The most grounded, effective people you'll ever meet are not people who feel nothing. They feel deeply about specific, carefully chosen things. What they've mastered is the art of strategic indifference, the conscious, deliberate decision about where their emotional energy goes and where it simply doesn't. Your attention is a resource. Your emotional energy is a resource. Like money, like time, finite, valuable, and subject to the same principle, spend it wisely or watch it disappear on things that give nothing back. Right now you are probably distributing your emotional energy something like this: a certain amount to things that genuinely matter to your life, your growth, your relationships, and a surprisingly large amount to things that have essentially zero bearing on your actual well-being. A stranger's dismissive comment online, a co-worker's opinion of your lunch choice, whether people you'll never meet again think well of you, the outcome of a social situation that will be completely irrelevant in 6 months. Drama in spaces you don't need to inhabit. Here's a clarifying question worth returning to often. Will this matter to me in 5 years? Not everything will survive that filter. Not everything should. And the things that don't survive it, the things that are real and present and activating right now but will be completely irrelevant in 5 years, those are the things that deserve your strategic indifference. This doesn't make you callous. It makes you focused. Let's be specific about what doesn't deserve your emotional investment. The opinion of people who don't know you, don't pay your bills, and won't be present for your growth. Random criticism from strangers, whether delivered to your face or through a screen. Other people's choices about their own lives that have no actual impact on yours. Situations you cannot influence. Outcomes that have already occurred and cannot be changed. And the ongoing performance of people who are fundamentally committed to being difficult. Now let's be equally specific about what does deserve it. Your own development, the slow, consistent work of becoming someone you respect. The relationships where genuine investment is both given and received. Your health, in the broadest sense. The work that aligns with your values. The people and causes where your energy actually makes a difference. Even within those categories, calibration matters. Not every conversation with a friend requires the same emotional intensity as a major life decision. Not every professional setback warrants the same response as a genuine crisis. Matching your emotional response to the actual weight of the situation is a skill, and most people have never consciously practiced it. One of the most liberating applications of strategic indifference is learning to release things quickly. When something difficult happens, feel what you need to feel. Don't perform in vulnerability. Don't skip the emotion, but then ask yourself, am I still feeling this, or am I now rehearsing this? Because there's a moment when genuine processing tips over into voluntary suffering, when you're no longer moving through the emotion, but replaying it on a loop, watering it, keeping it alive. That's not healing. That's rumination. And rumination is borrowing pain from a debt you've already paid. Extract the lesson. Release the charge. Move forward. This is not suppression. Suppression is pushing something down without looking at it. This is completion. Feeling something fully, understanding it, and then consciously choosing not to carry it beyond its useful life. Strategic indifference is ultimately about emotional sovereignty, deciding what gets access to your inner world, refusing to be a passive recipient of whatever emotional weather surrounds you, becoming, in the truest sense, the author of your own inner experience, not by controlling what happens around you, but by choosing how and whether it lands inside you. Chapter 8. Reclaiming your energy. If you took everything in the previous chapters and distilled it into a single practical directive, it would be this: guard your energy like it's the most valuable thing you have, because it is not your time, not your money, not your productivity. Your energy, the alive, present, creative, generative resource that makes everything else possible. When your energy is full, you think clearly, you love well, you work with power, you handle difficulty with grace. When it's depleted, everything degrades. Your patience disappears. Your perspective narrows. Your capacity for joy contracts. You become a slower, smaller, more reactive version of yourself. And yet, most people give their energy away with almost no consideration. They say yes to things that cost them everything and give them nothing. They spend hours in emotional states that serve no purpose. They absorb the anxiety of everyone around them as though it were their responsibility to carry it. The first step in changing this is awareness. For the next week, pay close attention to your energy as a measurable experience. After spending time with certain people, how do you feel? Energized, clear, like yourself? Or drained, flat, vaguely unsettled? After certain activities, do you come away feeling like you've invested well, or like something was taken from you? You'll start to notice patterns very quickly. Some people consistently leave you lighter. These are people whose company is genuinely nourishing. They bring curiosity, honesty, warmth, and the particular quality of making you feel more like yourself rather than less. These relationships deserve more of your time and investment. And then there are the others, the ones who turn every conversation into a referendum on their suffering, who create emergencies at a frequency that starts to feel like a personality feature, who take every piece of your advice, ignore it completely, and then return the following week with the same crisis, wearing slightly different clothes, who somehow leave you feeling responsible for problems you didn't cause and can't solve. You don't have to dramatically exit every draining relationship, but you can become more deliberate. You can keep certain conversations shorter. You can stop offering depth to people who consistently use your openness as a resource rather than a connection. You can, with kindness and without guilt, simply be less available than you used to be. This is not abandonment. This is stewardship. Here's where the guilt comes in, and it's worth addressing directly. Many people, especially those who identify as caring or empathetic, feel profoundly uncomfortable protecting their energy. It feels selfish. It feels like a betrayal of the people who need them. It feels like failing at the thing they most value about themselves. But consider this. When your energy is depleted, what exactly are you offering? A tired, resentful, half-present version of yourself, When you protect your energy, you become someone who can offer genuine presence, genuine care, genuine support, not the performance of support by someone running on empty. The airplane oxygen mask instruction exists for a reason. You cannot sustain others from a place of depletion. Caring for your energy is what makes real care for others possible. Now, beyond the people in your life, there are also internal energy leaks, habits and patterns that quietly bleed your resources throughout the day without you noticing. Checking your phone compulsively, not because you're expecting anything important, but because the habit of reaching for it has become so automatic, you're not even making a choice anymore. Replaying conversations from earlier in the day, looking for a different outcome that will never come because the conversation is over. Carrying guilt about things you can't change, worrying at length about scenarios that may never happen. Multitasking in a way that means you're never fully present anywhere. Each of these is a small withdrawal from an account that needs protecting. The antidote is not complexity, it's presence. When you're eating, eat. When you're in a conversation, be in that conversation. When you're working, work. The practice of being where you actually are, fully, without one eye on your phone and one part of your mind 3 conversations ahead, is both the simplest and most radical form of energy reclamation available to you, and perhaps the most powerful energy practice of all. Stop trying to control what you cannot control. The amount of mental and emotional energy the average person spends trying to influence outcomes that are fundamentally outside their reach is staggering. Worrying about what someone thinks, rehearsing conversations in hopes of controlling how they'll go, trying to manage other people's emotions so they'll be easier to be around. None of it works, and all of it costs. Focus your energy where you have actual leverage, your choices, your responses, your preparation, your attitude, your effort. Everything else, let it be what it's going to be. Your energy is too valuable to spend on what you can't move. Chapter 9. Mastering the Art of Difficult People. Let's talk about the people who test you, not the ones who simply disagree with you or see the world differently. Those people are often gifts, even when the wrapping is uncomfortable. I mean the ones who seem specifically engineered to get under your skin. The colleague who takes credit for your contributions with such casual confidence that you almost admire the audacity. The family member who can locate your most vulnerable insecurity from across a dinner table and press it with surgical precision. The friend who turns every conversation into a performance about their own suffering and somehow leaves you feeling guilty for having needs of your own. Every single one of us has people like this in our orbit. And how you respond to them, not occasionally, but consistently, is one of the most honest measures of where your emotional detachment practice actually stands. Here's the foundational understanding that changes everything about how you navigate difficult people. Their behavior is almost never about you. When someone is consistently manipulative, it's because at some point in their history, manipulation was the only tool available to them for getting their needs met. When someone is chronically aggressive, it's usually because they feel deeply powerless, and dominance is the only way they know how to reclaim a sense of control. When someone deflects, minimizes, or plays the victim, they're running a program that was written long before you arrived in their life. This doesn't make their behavior acceptable, it makes it understandable. And understandable behavior is far less likely to hook you emotionally because you stop taking it as a personal message and start seeing it as a pattern. Their pattern, rooted in their history, expressing itself in your direction. The moment you depersonalize someone's difficult behavior, you reclaim an enormous amount of power in the dynamic. Now let's get specific about the tactics, because difficult people tend to use a fairly predictable playbook. Guilt tripping is the art of making you feel responsible for their emotional state. After everything I've done for you, I guess I just don't matter. I thought you were different. The implicit message is always the same. Your choices are causing my pain, and it's your job to stop. The antidote is not defensiveness. The moment you start justifying yourself, you've accepted the premise that you owe them an explanation. You don't. A calm, non-reactive acknowledgement without compliance is your most powerful response. I hear that you're disappointed. My answer is still no. Gaslighting is the subtle art of making you doubt your own perception. That never happened. You're too sensitive. You're imagining things. It works because it exploits the natural human uncertainty about our own subjective experience. The protection against it is keeping your own record, not obsessively, but honestly. Trust what you observed. Trust what you felt. Trust the pattern, even when individual incidents are being reframed. Emotional blackmail escalates the stakes. If you do that, the threat might be explicit or implied. The point is to create fear of consequences severe enough that compliance feels easier than resistance. The only real answer to blackmail is to make it clear, through your behavior, consistently over time, that threats don't change your decisions. Once someone learns that leverage doesn't work on you, they typically stop reaching for it. The second key is learning to stay emotionally neutral during difficult interactions and understanding why that neutrality is so powerful. Most difficult behavior is, at its core, a bid for emotional response. The provocateur wants a reaction. The manipulator wants guilt. The aggressor wants fear or submission. The drama creator wants you swept up in the chaos alongside them. When you don't deliver what the behavior is reaching for, when you stay even, calm, and clear, the behavior loses its function. This is not about being cold or performing in vulnerability. It's about being genuinely unhooked. There's a profound difference between someone who is desperately suppressing a reaction and someone who is simply not having the expected one. The first is exhausting and usually visible. The second is effortless because you're not fighting anything, you're just not picking it up. Practice this in low-stakes situations first. The next time someone makes a pointed comment designed to provoke, let it pass without acknowledgement. Notice how it feels to simply not engage. That quietness, that refusal to feed the moment, that is a form of power that most people never develop. The gray rock method deserves a mention here because it's particularly effective with people who seem to feed specifically on your emotional responsiveness. The idea is simple. Become as uninteresting as possible. Short responses, neutral affect, no personal information, no emotional texture for them to grab onto. Not because you're performing distance, but because you've genuinely decided that this particular person doesn't have access to the parts of you that are worth engaging. People who thrive on drama and reaction need a responsive surface to work with. When you become smooth and featureless in your responses, like a gray rock, they tend to lose interest and redirect elsewhere. It is not satisfying enough to provoke someone who simply doesn't light up. Boundaries with difficult people deserve their own conversation because most people fundamentally misunderstand what a boundary is. A boundary is not a request. It's not a warning. It's not a punishment you threaten in the hope that someone will shape up. A boundary is simply a description of what you will and won't participate in, followed by consistent, calm action that demonstrates you mean it. The key word is consistent. A. Boundary stated once and then abandoned under pressure isn't a boundary. It's a suggestion. And most difficult people are very good at testing whether your limits are real or performative. The only answer to that test is the same answer calmly delivered every single time. You don't need to be angry to hold a boundary. You don't need to justify it extensively or make someone understand it before you enforce it. That doesn't work for me is enough. Your job is not to convince them your boundary is reasonable. Your job is simply to hold it. Finally, and this requires honesty, sometimes the most emotionally intelligent decision you can make about a difficult person is to significantly reduce or eliminate your exposure to them. This is not failure. This is not coldness. For some people, the only truly healthy boundary is distance. If someone is consistently abusive, if they fundamentally refuse to respect your limits, regardless of how clearly you communicate them, if the cost of the relationship to your well-being outweighs anything it offers, you are allowed to choose yourself. You cannot change difficult people. You cannot love them into becoming different. You cannot be patient enough or understanding enough or accommodating enough to transform someone who isn't interested in being transformed. What you can do is decide how much of your one life you're willing to spend in dynamics that diminish you. That decision belongs entirely to you. Chapter 10. The daily practice that actually changes you. Here's the gap where most people's good intentions go to die. You read something like this, something shifts, you feel it. That particular quality of recognition, like a door opening in a room you didn't know was there, you think, yes, this is what I've been missing. This is what needs to change. And then life resumes. Your phone buzzes. Someone needs something. The day fills up. And the insight, vivid and real just a few hours ago, begins to fade around the edges. Within a week, you're back in the same patterns. Not because you weren't sincere, but because insight without practice doesn't change behavior. It just changes how you narrate the same behavior to yourself. Understanding emotional detachment intellectually is not the same as being emotionally detached. The gap between knowing and being is bridged by one thing only: consistent, deliberate, daily practice. Your brain is a pattern recognition and pattern reinforcement machine. The emotional responses that feel so automatic right now. The anxiety when someone doesn't respond quickly. The deflation when you're criticized. The compulsive need to smooth things over when there's tension. Those aren't fixed features of your personality. They're deeply grooved habits. Neural pathways that have been traveled so many times, they feel like the only road. New pathways get built the same way the old ones did, through repetition, through choosing differently again and again until the new choice starts to feel natural. Here's what a practical daily detachment practice actually looks like. morning intention setting. Before your day begins, before you check your messages, before the demands of the world start arriving, take 10 minutes to consciously set your emotional orientation. Not with affirmations you don't believe, not by imagining a perfect day, but with genuine, specific questions. Who do I want to be today? When something activates me, and something will. What kind of response do I want to come from? If I face criticism today, how do I want to receive it? If someone tries to pull me into drama, what will I do? This sounds simple. It is simple. It's also remarkably effective because you're essentially pre-deciding your responses before the emotional heat of the moment makes clear thinking harder. You're setting the thermostat before the weather arrives. Midday check-ins. Set a quiet alert 2 or 3 times throughout your day. Not to be productive, but to be honest. When it goes off, pause and ask, what has my emotional state been like for the last few hours? Have I been present or have I been running on autopilot? Have I taken anything personally that probably isn't about me? Have I given emotional energy to something that doesn't deserve it? This regular self-monitoring keeps you from drifting into old patterns for hours before you notice. Instead of looking back at your day and realizing you spent most of it in reactive mode, you catch it in real time. And you have the opportunity to course correct while the day is still happening. Graduated exposure practice, emotional detachment, like physical fitness, is built through progressive challenge. You don't develop emotional resilience by avoiding the things that activate you. You develop it by choosing deliberately to face them with a different response. So start small and work toward the edges of your comfort zone consistently. If checking your phone first thing in the morning pulls you into anxiety before your day has even started, practice waiting 30 minutes before you look at it. Just 30 minutes. See what happens in that space. Notice what you feel and notice that you can tolerate it. If you typically share every accomplishment immediately, needing to see how it lands, practice sitting with one quietly. Let it be yours for a day before you offer it to anyone else's reaction. If you normally respond to criticism with immediate defensiveness, practice a single breath and a single question before you say anything. Is there anything useful in this for me? Not because the criticism is necessarily right, but because you want to be someone who can receive feedback without flinching. Each small practice builds capacity for larger ones. Over weeks and months, you'll notice that things which used to reliably unhook you simply don't anymore. Not because you've suppressed your responses, but because you've genuinely developed a different relationship to the triggers. Evening reflection. Before you close out your day, take 5 quiet minutes, not to judge yourself, but to learn from yourself. Where did you stay grounded today? Give yourself genuine credit for that. Where did you slip back into reactivity? Not with self-criticism, but with honest curiosity. What was the trigger? What was underneath it? What would you do differently tomorrow if the same situation arose? This reflection is not about maintaining a perfect record. It's about building self-knowledge. The more accurately you understand your own patterns, your specific triggers, your habitual responses, the particular situations where your detachment tends to fail, the more deliberately you can prepare for them. Environment design. Your environment is not neutral. It is constantly shaping your defaults, usually without your awareness. If your social media feed is a daily delivery of comparison, outrage, and validation seeking, it is quietly calibrating your emotional baseline toward reactivity, whether you intend it to or not. If the people you spend the most time with are operating from high emotional reactivity and low self-awareness, their patterns will pull on yours, especially in moments of stress. You don't have to make dramatic announcements about this, but you can make quiet, consistent choices. Curate your feeds toward content that reflects the person you're building. Spend more time in the company of people who model the emotional qualities you're developing. Create physical spaces in your home or routine where genuine quiet and presence are possible. Visualization as rehearsal. Professional athletes have used mental rehearsal for decades because the brain, to a meaningful degree, doesn't distinguish between vividly imagined experience and actual experience. The neural pathways that fire during a vivid mental rehearsal are largely the same ones that fire during the real event. Use this. Spend a few minutes each day imagining yourself in situations that typically challenge your detachment and seeing yourself navigate them the way you want to. Someone criticizes you in front of others, and you receive it with calm, open curiosity. Someone pushes a button that used to reliably produce a reaction, and you stay even, clear, and grounded. A plan falls apart, and instead of collapsing, you adapt with flexibility and grace. You're not lying to yourself about what's difficult. You're rehearsing a response that is genuinely available to you and making it more accessible by practicing it in advance. Over time, what you rehearse becomes what you do, and what you do consistently becomes who you are. Chapter 11. Detachment in the relationships that matter most here is the paradox at the heart of everything we've been building toward. The more emotionally detached you become, the more deeply you are capable of connecting. This sounds backwards. It sounds like the opposite of what love and closeness require. But sit with it, because it's one of the most important truths about human relationships. When you are emotionally dependent in a relationship, when you need the other person to behave a certain way for you to feel okay, when their moods determine your moods, when you're constantly managing the dynamic rather than simply being present in it, that's not closeness. That's entanglement. And entanglement, however intense it feels, is not the same thing as intimacy. Genuine intimacy requires two people who are each fundamentally okay on their own, and who choose to share their lives not out of desperation or fear or the need to feel complete, but out of genuine appreciation for each other's company. That kind of choosing is only possible when you're not gripping. Let's make this practical. Maintain your own identity. In relationships, romantic relationships especially, but also close friendships and family dynamics, there's a slow gravitational pull toward merger. You start to organize your interests around theirs. Your social world begins to overlap almost completely with theirs. The question, what do I want, gradually gets replaced by, what do we want? Which often really means, what do they want? This erosion of individual identity doesn't feel dangerous while it's happening. It often feels like love, like closeness, like commitment. But what it's actually doing is making you dependent in a way that will eventually create resentment in you and sometimes in them. The most attractive, most fulfilling version of you in any relationship is the one who has a life, who has interests that are genuinely yours, who has friendships that exist independently of the relationship, who would, on some level, still be okay, still be you, if the relationship changed or ended. This is not a threat to commitment. It is the foundation of sustainable love. Stop absorbing other people's emotional states. When someone you love is having a hard time, the most natural thing in the world is to feel it with them. Empathy is a gift, and it's one of the most important qualities in any close relationship. But there's a version of empathy that crosses into absorption, where you don't just understand what someone is feeling, but take it on as your own, where their anxiety becomes your anxiety, their sadness floods your day, their stress becomes the weather inside your house. This helps no one. When you absorb someone else's emotional state, you lose the very clarity and groundedness that would allow you to actually support them. You become two anxious people instead of one anxious person with a calm, present companion. You can be with someone in their difficulty without disappearing into it with them. You can hold space for their experience without making it yours. You can listen with genuine care and then return to your own center, not as an act of withholding, but as an act of maintaining the stability that makes you genuinely useful to them. Be honest, even when honesty is uncomfortable. Relationships built on emotional dependency tend to accumulate silence. Things that need to be said don't get said because the fear of disrupting the dynamic feels greater than the cost of leaving something unaddressed. Resentments build quietly. Distance grows without a named reason. Emotional detachment in relationships means having the conversations that matter even when they're uncomfortable, because you're not so afraid of the relationship ending that you'll sacrifice its honesty to preserve its surface. This requires the particular courage of someone who knows they'll be okay, regardless of the outcome. Someone who would rather have a real relationship that requires hard conversations than a comfortable performance that slowly hollows out. Love people as they are, not as you need them to be. This might be the most difficult practice in any close relationship. When we love someone, we tend to develop a vision of who they could be, who they would be, if they just addressed that one pattern, made that one change, grew in that one direction. And then we spend enormous energy trying to influence, encourage, or pressure them toward that vision. Sometimes this is genuinely supportive. Often it's control disguised as care. Emotional detachment in relationships means loving the actual person in front of you, with their current limitations, their unresolved patterns, their particular way of being in the world, rather than an idealized version of them that requires your ongoing management to exist. It means accepting that you cannot change another person, that your sustained disappointment in who they are is information about the gap between your expectations and reality, and that it's your expectations, not them, that you have the power to examine. This doesn't mean accepting genuinely harmful behavior or staying in dynamics that damage you. It means releasing the quieter, more pervasive form of control, the constant low-level project of trying to make someone different than they are. Hold the relationship with an open hand. Perhaps the deepest practice of all, loving someone without gripping them, the clinging that comes from attachment, the need to know where they are, the anxiety when they need space, the jealousy that comes from insecurity rather than genuine threat. That doesn't protect love. It slowly suffocates it. Holding a relationship with an open hand means trusting it enough not to control it. It means allowing the other person the freedom to be fully themselves, knowing that authentic connection can only exist between two people who are each free. It means accepting that you cannot guarantee any outcome and choosing love anyway, with full awareness of that uncertainty. This is the hardest and most mature form of love available to a human being. It requires everything we've been building in this conversation. Self-worth that doesn't depend on being chosen. Emotional independence that doesn't require constant reassurance. And enough groundedness in yourself that someone else's freedom doesn't feel like a threat to your stability. When you love like this, freely, honestly, with open hands, something remarkable tends to happen. The relationship becomes more genuine, more sustainable, more mutually nourishing, because you're finally in it as yourself, with someone who is themselves, choosing each other without desperation. That is worth building toward. Chapter 12. Emotional Detachment at Work. Let's talk about the place where most people quietly hemorrhage their power on a daily basis. Not in dramatic confrontations, not in obvious crises, but in the slow, steady accumulation of small moments. The meeting where you didn't speak up, the project where you absorbed someone else's stress, the performance review that sent you into a spiral for days, the colleague who takes credit for your work and somehow you're the one who feels guilty about it. The workplace is a particularly fertile environment for emotional attachment because it combines several of the most potent triggers in a single location. Your financial security, your sense of competence, your social belonging, your identity, and your sense of being valued, all wrapped up in one place, several hours a day, 5 days a week. That is an enormous amount of your life to be emotionally undefended. Professional detachment is not about caring less about your work. It's not about becoming disengaged or indifferent to quality or outcomes. The most professionally detached people are often some of the most committed, most effective workers in any organization, precisely because they're operating from genuine investment rather than fear. The difference is in the foundation. One person works hard because they love what they do and want to contribute something meaningful. Another works hard because they're terrified of what will happen if they don't, or because their sense of worth rises and falls with every piece of feedback they receive. These two people may produce similar results in the short term, but over time, the first person grows. The second person burns out. Your job title is not your identity. This might be the most foundational piece of professional detachment, and it's one of the most difficult for high-achieving people to genuinely internalize. When someone asks who you are at a dinner party, what comes out first? For many people, it's their job, not their values, not their relationships, not their curiosity, not the things that actually animate them on a Tuesday evening, their professional role. Their career has become the primary answer to the question of who they are. This creates an almost invisible but enormously costly form of vulnerability, because jobs change, industries evolve, companies restructure, roles get eliminated. And when any of those things happen to someone whose identity is built primarily around their career, it doesn't just feel like a professional setback. It feels like a personal annihilation. You are not your job. Your job is something you do. something you may do brilliantly and with genuine passion, but it is not the totality of who you are. Keeping that distinction alive, especially during professional success when the merger feels good, is one of the most important things you can do for your long-term well-being. Workplace dynamics are almost never personal. The colleague who undermines you in meetings is revealing their own insecurity about being outshined, not making an objective assessment of your competence. The manager who micromanages is expressing their own anxiety about control, not communicating that you're untrustworthy. The team that overlooks your contribution is caught up in their own political navigation, not delivering a verdict on your worth. When you can see workplace behavior as the expression of other people's internal states rather than as information about your value, something shifts. You stop taking things personally that were never personal to begin with. You stop spending days processing things that deserved at most a few minutes of clear-eyed consideration. This clarity is not detachment from the situation. It's detachment from the story. You can still address what needs to be addressed professionally, directly, without unnecessary charge. But you do it from a place of groundedness rather than from the activated state of someone who believes their worth is under attack. Outcome independence in your career. You apply for the promotion knowing you might not get it. You share the idea in the meeting, knowing it might be dismissed. You start the project knowing it might fail. And in each of these cases, you move forward anyway, not recklessly but freely, because your emotional well-being is not contingent on the specific result. This is not passive. This is not indifferent. This is the posture of someone who brings full effort and full commitment to their work, and then releases the outcome because they understand, genuinely, that outcomes have variables they don't control. The professional who is emotionally hostage to their results tends to become risk-averse in ways that limit their growth. They stop raising their hand for difficult projects because failure feels too costly. They stop speaking honestly in rooms where honesty might be unwelcome. They stay in roles that have stopped serving them because the uncertainty of leaving feels worse than the certainty of stagnation. The professional who is outcome independent becomes genuinely bold, not because they don't care about results, but because their sense of self doesn't collapse if the result isn't what they hoped. Receiving feedback without losing your ground. In any career worth having, feedback will come, some of it useful, some of it poorly delivered, some of it unfair, and occasionally some of it genuinely difficult to hear. Your capacity to receive feedback without becoming defensive, without crumbling, and without dismissing it reflexively will determine the pace of your professional growth more than almost anything else. When feedback lands, your nervous system will often fire before your rational mind has had time to evaluate. That's normal. The practice is the pause, the breath, the moment of creating space before you respond. And then the question, is there anything genuinely useful here? Is there a signal in this noise that I'd benefit from hearing? Sometimes the answer is yes. Sometimes someone poorly worded piece of criticism contains a truth you needed to sit with. Sometimes the feedback is entirely about the other person's preferences and has nothing instructive for you. The goal is to be able to sort those two categories, not automatically and not defensively, but with genuine openness and a stable enough sense of self that you're not threatened by the process. Know when to leave. Professional detachment gives you something that emotional attachment never can: the freedom to make clear-eyed decisions about when a role, a team, or an organization is no longer serving your growth. Many people stay in professional situations long past their expiration date, in roles that stopped challenging them years ago, in cultures that consistently conflict with their values, under leadership that diminishes rather than develops them, because they've attached their identity, their security, or their sense of belonging so deeply to the current situation that leaving feels like a kind of death. But staying somewhere that isn't growing you out of attachment rather than genuine choice is a form of self-betrayal that compounds over time. Every year you spend in a situation you've outgrown is a year that belongs to your potential that you're spending on your comfort. Professional detachment means being willing to ask, honestly and regularly, is this still the right place for me? Not from restlessness or dissatisfaction for its own sake, but from genuine commitment to your own growth and contribution, and being willing to act on the honest answer. Chapter 13. When everything falls apart. Detachment in crisis. At some point, life will hand you something you didn't see coming. Not a difficult day, not a frustrating week. Something genuinely destabilizing, a loss, a failure, a betrayal, a diagnosis, a door closing that you had built significant parts of your future around. And in that moment, every concept we've explored in this conversation will be tested at a depth that ordinary daily practice doesn't reach. This is not a reason to doubt the practice. It's the reason for it. The people who navigate major crises most effectively, who emerge from genuinely difficult circumstances with their integrity intact and often with something profound gained, are not people who didn't feel the impact. They felt it fully. What they had was a set of internal resources developed long before the crisis arrived, which gave them the capacity to stay functional, clear-headed, and grounded even while genuinely suffering. That is what you are building. Not immunity from difficulty, capacity for it. Accept that crisis is part of the deal. This sounds brutal. It isn't meant to be pessimistic. It's meant to be honest in a way that is ultimately liberating. Most people live with a quiet, unexamined assumption that if they do the right things, work hard, treat people well, make good choices, they will be protected from serious difficulty. And then when difficulty arrives anyway, there's an additional layer of suffering added to the crisis itself. The bewildered, furious sense of this wasn't supposed to happen to me. It was always supposed to happen to you. Not specifically this thing, not at this time. But difficulty, loss, unexpected change, the experience of things not going the way you hoped, that is the human experience, not the exception, the texture. When you genuinely accept this, when you stop carrying the implicit belief that you should be exempt from hardship, the arrival of difficulty stops feeling like a cosmic injustice and starts feeling like the thing you prepared for. And that shift in how crisis is interpreted changes everything about how you move through it. In a crisis, ruthlessly prioritize what you can control. This is where the foundational practice of distinguishing between what is and isn't within your influence becomes most valuable and most difficult. In the middle of genuine crisis, the mind tends to scatter. It races across the entire landscape of the situation, lighting on things that are terrifying, things that are uncertain, things that are entirely outside your reach. And it spends enormous energy there, in the territory of the uncontrollable, which produces nothing except more fear and more exhaustion. The practice, and it requires real discipline in these moments, is to keep returning to the smaller, cleaner question. What can I actually do right now? Not what do I wish were different, not what might go wrong next. What is the one thing within my actual reach in this actual moment that I can choose, do, or move toward? Crisis narrows to manageability when you keep that question at the center. One step, then the next. The whole mountain doesn't need to be climbed before noon, just the next foothold. Refuse to make permanent decisions from temporary pain. This is perhaps the most practical and most violated principle in crisis management. When you are in genuine pain, when loss is fresh, when fear is high, when your usual emotional foundations feel shaky, your brain will generate solutions at a pace that feels urgent and compelling. Leave, cut off, give up, start over entirely, burn it down and see what survives. Sometimes these impulses contain wisdom. More often, they contain panic wearing the costume of decisiveness. The general principle: when you're in the acute phase of a crisis, minimize the number of major irreversible decisions you make. Not because you're incapable, but because the version of you making decisions at the peak of emotional intensity is not necessarily the version best positioned to determine the direction of the next 5 years of your life. Give yourself the gift of time when time is available. Let the acute wave pass. Make the decisions that need to be made immediately, and hold the rest until you can think from a more grounded place. Use crisis as data, not verdict. Every significant difficulty you move through reveals something about you that comfortable times never could. It shows you where you're actually strong, and which is often not where you thought. The things you assumed would devastate you may turn out to be manageable. The resources you discover in yourself under pressure may surprise you profoundly. The clarity that sometimes arrives in crisis about what actually matters, about who is actually in your corner, about what you actually want your life to look like, can be among the most valuable information you ever receive. This is not toxic positivity. This is not everything happens for a reason, dressed up in different language. It's a genuine recognition that difficulty is among the most honest and revealing experiences available to a human being, and that what you learn from it about yourself and about your life has the potential to redirect you toward something more true. Build your support infrastructure before you need it. One of the most consistently underestimated principles of crisis-proof living is this: the time to build your support system is not during the crisis. It's before. The friendships worth having, the ones where genuine mutual care and honesty exist, require consistent investment during ordinary times, not because you're banking favors, but because depth in any relationship is built slowly through accumulated small moments of presence, honesty, and showing up. You cannot fast-track genuine closeness in the middle of an emergency. Similarly, financial resilience, professional adaptability, physical health, and psychological groundedness. All of these are resources that protect you during difficulty, and all of them are built gradually, during the times when nothing is on fire. The best crisis preparation is a well-lived, ordinary life. Chapter 14. The Transformed Version of You. After months of this practice, and it will take months, not days, something begins to shift that is difficult to articulate but unmistakable to experience. You wake up one morning and notice that a situation which would have consumed you 6 months ago barely registered. Someone makes a comment that used to be reliable ammunition against your self-worth, and you observe it with something close to curiosity rather than pain. A plan falls through, and instead of the familiar spiral, you find yourself already pivoting, already asking what comes next. You haven't become invulnerable. You haven't become cold. You haven't stopped caring about things. You've become grounded, and grounded is something entirely different from numb. Grounded means you feel everything. The full texture of joy, loss, love, disappointment, connection, longing, but from a stable center, like a tree in wind, moved but rooted, present but not swept away. Your relationships change in ways you didn't fully anticipate. The ones built primarily on your emotional dependency or other people's, the ones sustained by the subtle dynamic of your need and their availability or vice versa, those tend to shift or fade, not dramatically, not with conflict. They just gradually find their natural level, which turns out to be less central to your life than they once were. And the relationships that were genuinely mutual, the ones where real care and real honesty existed, those tend to deepen because you show up to them differently. You're no longer asking them beneath the surface of every interaction to tell you that you're okay. You arrive already okay, and you're simply present with them, for real. The people around you feel this difference even if they can't name it. There's a quality to the presence of someone who isn't performing, isn't managing, isn't quietly waiting for validation, and it is profoundly relieving to be with. You become, without trying to be, someone people feel genuinely at ease around. Your inner life becomes quieter, not empty, quieter. The constant hum of background anxiety that you may have become so accustomed to that you stopped noticing it. The low-level scanning for threats, the subtle rehearsal of worst-case scenarios, the ongoing management of other people's impressions. That begins to soften, not because your life has become easier, because your relationship to difficulty has changed. You start to trust yourself in a way that is different from confidence in your abilities. It's trust in your own capacity to handle what arrives. And that trust, earned through having actually handled things, through having sat with discomfort and discovered you survived it, through having held your ground when it would have been easier to fold, is one of the most stabilizing forces available to a human being. Your work becomes more authentic. You take risks you would have avoided before, not because you stopped caring about outcomes, but because your worth is no longer hostage to them. You speak up in rooms where your voice was previously swallowed by fear of the response. You pursue things that genuinely matter to you rather than things calibrated to impress the relevant audience. And paradoxically, this authenticity tends to produce better results than the carefully managed performance it replaces. Because people can tell the difference. Everyone can feel the difference between someone who is operating from genuine conviction and someone who is performing in hopes of a specific reaction. Authentic is more compelling, always. You discover what you actually want. This one surprises people when the noise of seeking approval and managing impressions begins to quiet. There is space for a different and more important question to arise. What do I actually want? Not what will make people think well of me. Not what will feel safe or certain or approved. What genuinely matters to me? What does my life, built on my actual values rather than borrowed ones, look like? For many people, answering this question honestly for the first time is both liberating and slightly disorienting. Some of what you find will be familiar, things you always knew you wanted, but never quite gave yourself permission to pursue. Some of it will be surprising. Some former priorities will reveal themselves to have been entirely about approval, and once the approval motive is removed, the thing itself turns out to hold very little interest for you. This recalibration is one of the quiet gifts of this entire process. It is the beginning of a life built from the inside out, rather than the outside in. Chapter 15. This is your life. Choose it. We've traveled a long way together in these pages. You've looked honestly at how emotional dependency forms, how it operates, and what it costs. You've examined the psychology beneath your automatic reactions and seen that those reactions are not fixed features of who you are. They're patterns installed early, reinforced over time, and fully capable of being changed. You've been given a set of tools, not tricks, not shortcuts, but genuine practices that build real capacity over time. The pause before the reaction, the curiosity that replaces judgment, the boundaries that aren't walls but expressions of self-respect, the daily habits that slowly, reliably rewire how you move through the world. And you've been given a vision of what's on the other side, not the absence of feeling, not cold invulnerability, but the particular freedom of someone who is fully present to their life without being controlled by it. Now comes the only part that actually matters. What are you going to do with it? Because this is where most people's journey with ideas like these ends, at the moment of inspiration, before the moment of application. The insight is real. The recognition is genuine. And then the familiar current of daily life reasserts itself. And without a clear decision to act differently, the old patterns quietly resume their authority. So let's be direct about what this requires. It requires choosing every day to do the slightly harder thing, the pause instead of the reaction, the honest conversation instead of the comfortable silence, the boundary instead of the accommodation, the self-validation instead of the anxious wait for someone else's approval. It requires patience with yourself when you slip, and you will slip regularly for a long time. The measure of your progress is not whether you're perfect. It's whether over weeks and months you notice yourself slipping less frequently, recovering more quickly, and returning to your center with more ease. It requires a willingness to be temporarily uncomfortable in the service of becoming more free. And because some of what changes as you build emotional detachment will feel at first like loss, the loss of familiar dynamics, the loss of relationships that were held together by your emotional dependency, the loss of the particular identity of someone who needs to be needed. These losses are real, even when what replaces them is healthier and more true. And it requires, more than anything else, the decision to take your own life seriously enough to do the work. Not because anyone is watching, not because you'll be rewarded for it, but because you are worth the effort of becoming the version of yourself that is fully alive, genuinely free, and operating from your deepest strength rather than your oldest fears. You already know what it costs to live the way you've been living. The anxiety, the exhaustion, the quiet erosion of your own authenticity in the service of managing other people's impressions and reactions. You've been paying that price for a long time. The investment this asks of you is significant, but the return is your actual life, lived consciously, authentically, from the inside out. A life where your emotional state belongs to you, where your worth is not a variable dependent on external conditions, where you can love freely, work boldly, and move through the world as someone who has taken back what was always theirs. That life is not reserved for people with particular personalities, particular histories, or particular circumstances. It is built, one pause, one practice, one conscious choice at a time, by anyone willing to do the work. You have everything you need. The only question left is whether you'll begin. Chapter 16, The Manifesto of the Emotionally Free Person. There is a version of you that already exists, not in some distant future after years of perfect practice, not after you've resolved every wound or eliminated every trigger, but available right now, in this moment, as a choice about how you're going to show up starting today. This chapter is not a summary. It's not a checklist. It's a declaration, a concrete articulation of the principles, commitments, and daily orientations that define someone who has genuinely chosen emotional freedom over emotional dependency. Read it slowly. Read it like you mean it, because the distance between where you are and where you're capable of being is not as vast as it sometimes feels. It is bridged, one decision at a time, by the commitments that follow. I take full responsibility for my emotional state, not partial responsibility, not responsibility with asterisks and exceptions for particularly difficult people or particularly unfair situations. Full responsibility. This means acknowledging that no one else makes me feel anything. People do things, events happen, and then I respond. And that response, however automatic it feels, is ultimately mine. When I stop locating the source of my emotional experience outside of myself, I stop being at the mercy of whatever the day brings. I become, in the truest sense, the author of my inner life. This is the hardest commitment and the most liberating one. The moment I stop waiting for external circumstances to be different before I allow myself to feel okay, I reclaim the only power that has ever truly belonged to me. I know my worth, and I don't put it up for negotiation. My value as a human being is not a number that goes up when I'm praised and down when I'm criticized. It is not contingent on my productivity, my appearance, my relationship status, my social standing, or anyone's current opinion of me. This is not arrogance. Arrogance is the performance of confidence by someone who is secretly terrified of being found lacking. What I'm describing is something quieter and more solid. A simple, settled recognition that I exist, that my existence has inherent worth, and that no external event has the authority to revoke that. When I truly live from this place, criticism becomes information I can evaluate without being destabilized by it. Rejection becomes incompatibility rather than inadequacy. Disapproval becomes one person's perspective rather than a verdict on my fundamental value. I am not for everyone. Not everyone will understand me, appreciate me, or choose me. And I am entirely okay with that, because my worth was never theirs to determine. I choose where my emotional energy goes. My attention is finite. My emotional capacity has limits. And I am the one who decides what gets access to both. I do not owe every provocative comment a reaction. I do not owe every difficult person my full emotional engagement. I do not owe every outcome I hoped for an extended period of grief when it doesn't materialize. I am allowed to be selective about what I engage with, what I carry, and what I simply let pass by without picking up. This selectivity is not callousness. It is stewardship. I am choosing to invest my limited emotional resources in the people, pursuits, and experiences that genuinely deserve them, and to practice strategic indifference toward everything else. Every day I ask myself, is this worth my energy? And when the honest answer is no, I practice the quiet power of letting it go. I hold my relationships with open hands. I love the people in my life genuinely, deeply, and without the invisible strings of expectation and control that turn love into dependency. I do not need the people I love to behave in specific ways for me to feel okay. I do not need them to validate my choices, mirror my emotions, or maintain certain patterns to preserve my sense of security. I love them as they are, not as I need them to be. This open-handed love does not make me passive or a pushover. I have clear values, and I communicate them honestly. I hold boundaries not as punishment, but as the natural expression of self-respect. But within those boundaries, I give the people I love the freedom to be fully themselves, because authentic connection is only possible between two people who are genuinely free. I release the need to control outcomes in my relationships. I bring my full self, my genuine care, my honest communication, and then I let the relationship be what it is. This is both the most vulnerable and the most powerful way to love. I do not take other people's behavior personally. When someone is dismissive, I understand they are expressing their own internal weather. When someone is critical, I recognize they are seeing through the lens of their own experience, preferences, and unresolved patterns. When someone withdraws or lashes out or manipulates, I see the fear or pain beneath the behavior, and I choose not to absorb it as information about my worth. This is not naivety. I can still see clearly what is happening. I can still address what needs to be addressed, but I do it from a place of clarity rather than from the activated state of someone who believes their fundamental value is under attack. Other people's behavior is data about them. I collect it, evaluate it, and act on whatever is genuinely useful, without making it mean more than it does. I am comfortable with discomfort. Growth lives at the edge of comfort. Every meaningful thing I have ever built in my life required me to move through some form of uncertainty, difficulty, or fear. And every time I did, every time I chose the harder thing and came through the other side, I became someone slightly more capable, slightly more grounded, slightly more free. I no longer treat emotional discomfort as a signal that something has gone wrong. I treat it as a signal that something important is happening, that I am being asked to grow in a direction I haven't grown before. When the conversation gets hard, I stay in it. When the uncertainty is uncomfortable, I tolerate it without immediately reaching for false resolution. When failure arrives, and it will arrive, I sit with the feeling, extract what it has to teach me, and move forward without letting it become the story of who I am. I am not fragile. I have been tested, and I have stayed standing, and every future test will further prove what I am already beginning to know about myself. I invest in my own foundation daily. Emotional freedom is not a destination. It is a practice, ongoing, imperfect, and worth recommitting to every single day. Each morning, I choose my orientation before the world chooses it for me. Each evening, I reflect honestly on where I stayed grounded and where I drifted, not with judgment, but with genuine curiosity and the intention to do better tomorrow. Each week, I ask whether my habits, my relationships, and my investments of time and energy are aligned with the person I am building, or whether I've been drifting on autopilot back toward old patterns. I protect my energy as the valuable resource it is. I cultivate relationships that are genuinely mutual. I pursue work that aligns with my values. I build interests and sources of meaning that belong to me regardless of what anyone else thinks of them. I am the foundation of my own life, not someone else's approval, not external circumstances being a certain way. Me, my choices, my values, my daily practice of showing up as the version of myself I am consciously building. I know that freedom is built, not found. There is no moment of arrival, no morning you wake up and find that all the old patterns have dissolved and emotional sovereignty has simply installed itself while you slept. That's not how this works. What actually happens, what I am committed to experiencing, is something slower and more real, gradual, cumulative, built from 10,000 small choices to pause instead of react, to validate myself instead of waiting for external approval, to hold my ground kindly and consistently, to release what isn't mine to carry. Over time, those choices accumulate into character, into identity, into a way of moving through the world that is genuinely, sustainably different from where I started. I am not the person I was at the beginning of this conversation. I am already, in some small but real way, someone who sees more clearly, who understands something about how their emotional life has been operating and has chosen consciously to operate differently. That choice is the beginning, and beginnings, made with genuine intention and followed by consistent action, have a way of becoming everything. The world needs people who have done this work, not because the world needs more invulnerable people, not because coldness or detachment in the cheap sense is a virtue anyone should aspire to, but because the world genuinely needs more people who can be present without being desperate, caring without being controlling, strong without being closed, and honest without being cruel. People who can stay calm when the room is escalating, who can receive hard truths without being destroyed by them, who can love freely rather than grippingly. Every person who does this work becomes, in some quiet way, a resource for everyone around them, not because they're performing wisdom or playing the role of the healed one, but because genuine groundedness is contagious in the best possible way. It gives other people permission to be more themselves. It models a way of being that most people hunger for without knowing how to name it. You doing this work is not a private act. It ripples. So this is the invitation stated plainly. Choose the pause over the reaction. Choose self-knowledge over self-deception. Choose authentic connection over desperate approval-seeking. Choose the harder conversation over the comfortable silence. Choose your own foundation over borrowed validation. Choose freedom, not as a concept, but as a daily practice, maintained imperfectly and recommitted to consistently, for as long as you have days to live. Your power was never gone. It was just on loan to the wrong places. Take it back. The 30-day emotional detachment starter plan, you've absorbed a significant amount of material. Now let's make it impossible to not start. What follows is a simple, practical, 30-day framework. Not a rigid schedule, but a progressive structure that takes the concepts from this conversation and translates them into daily lived experience. Each week builds on the last. By the end of 30 days, you won't have completed the journey, but you will have genuinely begun it, which is the only thing that actually matters right now. Week 1, awareness. The entire focus of your first week is observation. You are not trying to change anything yet. You are simply paying attention with more honesty and precision than you probably ever have before. Each morning, before you check your phone or begin your day, take 3 minutes to ask, what is my emotional baseline right now? Not what it should be, what it actually is. Throughout the day, notice every time something external shifts your internal state. Someone's comment, a notification, a silence where you expected a response, a look across the room. Don't judge the reaction. Don't try to stop it. Just notice it. Note it internally with curiosity. There it is. That triggered something. Each evening, spend 5 minutes reviewing. Where did your emotional state get borrowed by someone else's behavior today? Where were you reacting rather than responding? What patterns do you notice? You are building your map. You cannot navigate terrain you haven't looked at honestly. Week 2, the pause. This week, you introduce one practice and apply it consistently, the pause. Every time you notice a trigger, every time something lands and you feel the familiar pull toward an automatic reaction, you pause before responding. 1 breath, 3 seconds. Sometimes that's all it takes to create the space between stimulus and response where choice lives. You will not always choose perfectly in that space. You don't need to. The practice this week is simply creating the space itself, again and again, in situation after situation, until the pause begins to feel more natural than the immediate reaction. By the end of this week, you will have experienced, in your own life, in real situations, what it feels like to have a moment of choice where before there was none. That experience is irreplaceable. Week 3, boundaries and self-validation. This week, you practice 2 things simultaneously because they reinforce each other powerfully. First, identify one area of your life where your boundary is consistently being violated, where someone regularly does something that costs you energy, peace, or self-respect, and where your habitual response has been to accommodate rather than address it. This week, you respond differently. You don't need a dramatic confrontation. You need one clear, calm, honest communication of what works for you and what doesn't, and then you need to mean it. Second, identify one emotional need you have been consistently outsourcing. The need to feel valued, capable, seen, or encouraged. Every day this week, practice meeting that need yourself first. Before you look outward, acknowledge your own effort. Recognize your own progress. Speak to yourself with the warmth and honesty you would offer to someone you genuinely love. These 2 practices together, holding your own boundaries and meeting your own needs, are the cornerstones of emotional independence. Week 4, integration. Your final week is about integration, weaving what you've practiced into your actual daily identity, rather than treating it as an intervention you apply when you remember to. This week, review your morning intention practice. Who do you want to be today? Each evening, reflect with genuine honesty. Did I live that? Where did I show up as the person I'm building? Where did I drift back into old patterns? And what does that tell me about what still needs attention? Share. Nothing about this process on social media. Keep it internal. Let this be something you are doing for yourself, not performing for anyone else's reaction. The moment you start curating your growth for an audience, you've introduced the very validation-seeking pattern you're trying to move beyond. By the end of 30 days, you will not be finished. You will be underway. And being underway, genuinely, honestly, with your feet actually moving, is everything. The path forward is simply more of this. More awareness, more pauses, more honest conversations, more self-validation, more strategic choices about where your energy goes, more mornings of choosing your orientation before the world chooses it for you. Practiced consistently over months and years, these small daily choices accumulate into something profound. A person who is genuinely free. Not free from difficulty or emotion or the full complexity of human experience, but free from the invisible chains of dependency, reactivity, and borrowed identity that most people never even recognize as the prison they're living in. You've seen the prison now. The door is open. Walk through it.